Good morning and welcome. We're really an honor to have Senator Hickenlooper here. You've been, as we heard today, mayor of Denver, governor, senator, opened Colorado's first brew pub, and you're a geologist. I think other than quarterback of the Broncos, you've had every good thing Colorado has to offer.
Well, Peyton Manning threw me a pass one time after practice, so I got close.
Terrific. Well, let's jump right in and talk about reconciliation. For here, I think that's on everyone's mind. We've seen the president calling for a bill by July 4th. We've seen the House, big, beautiful bill passed by one vote, which the Senate declared dead on arrival. We've seen the Senate Finance Committee language, which the House has called, or at least two members of the House said they won't vote for. Can you take us through what's the process from here? What's the Senate going to do? And when is it going to do it?
So, and this is going to be a defining set of negotiations over the next few weeks, because there are so many divisions within the Republican Party and the Democratic Party that are, anchored down to a place where they don't feel they can move very far. And the reconciliation bill that is coming back, that we're beginning to see in the Senate, is going to be very, very harsh to a lot of Republican interests. If you look at where a lot of the incentives and tax credits in the Inflation Reduction Act, which I was very involved in getting that passed, I know it pretty well, a lot of that, of those benefits go into red states, states that are, have Republican legislatures and governors, and they're going to lose not just the incentives going into their state, but the jobs, these new companies that are emerging. And I mean, it's not just wind and solar, it's geothermal. It's all these different sources of energy that are going to get sliced to pieces in many ways. Things like hydrogen we were talking about earlier gets almost eliminated. Distributed solar, where people putting it onto their homes, that's not quite as large a number in terms of how many billions of dollars will be cut and saved from the budget, but it is in jobs. You're talking not just tens of thousands, but probably hundreds of thousands of jobs, many of these now in red states. So with the tariffs and other things, you've got to keep in mind, are you fueling inflation? Are you beginning to see collateral damage that's going to come from this allegedly big and beautiful bill?
Yeah, it's a little unusual. I can't really recall a time when the Congress has considered revoking tax breaks, in the middle of their term. And yesterday we heard from all kinds of investors, JP Morgan and banks, and the two things they want for investment are regulatory certainty and fiscal certainty. And now we're creating a lot of potentially huge amount of waste. So do your fellow senators get this? And do you think that the Senate bill will be better than the Senate Finance Committee language? Do you think they will extend the term for some of these tax credits? Do you think they're going to address some of these red state issues?
It's hard to say, because there are so many different discussions taking place. And at least I know I've worked hard in the last 4 years to build relationships of trust with a number of Republican senators who I have great respect for. There are a number of former governors who are pragmatic and understand that we've got to come to a solution that's going to have a level of certainty that's missing from the equation right now. Whether they can each one has different priorities and interests that they have to balance, whether they will come together and say, all right, we're none of us going to get everything we want, but let's get this much hydrogen, this much wind, this much solar, this much geothermal, and try and piece it together. These start times or when they have to be completed by, I think start times are taking precedence now in most of the negotiations, which I think is a good thing. I think there's a good chance that we will get to some sort of a compromise in the Senate and then go back to the House. And that's if the Senate can get to a reasonable compromise where even all the Republicans feel that they've gotten someplace that they can defend, they can speak about in their re-elections, that'll be amazing progress. To get that, whatever that looks like, through the Senate is going to be an act of God.
And what happens from there? Will there be a formal reconciliation process, or will the Senate say, this is the bill we passed, if you want it on July 4th, sign it?
I think that's what's going to happen. But I suspect, if history is any predictor of the future, I suspect our president will insert himself probably not immediately, but before the Senate bill is completed, and try to get that bill close to where he thinks he can push it through in the House. I think the White House will have a voice in that. And again, I think the White House cares, as close as I can tell, cares about getting a bill. They want a good bill, something they can live with and campaign on, but they want to make sure they get something through by the 4th of July. Well, again, a lot of skeptics on that timeline.
Terrific. Let's talk a little bit about energy demand. Here, the conversation certainly yesterday has been, the phenomenal demand of hyperscalers, gigawatt demand, the likes of which we haven't seen in this country since, the end of World War II. And everyone's wondering where this energy is going to come from. We've heard a lot of talk about all of the above from industry. We haven't heard so much about all of the above from the administration. So from your perspective, and you're a geologist, so you know where the rocks are and where this stuff comes from, where do you see this demand coming from, and what do you think we can do as a country, or what you can do in the Senate to help make sure we can take advantage of this opportunity?
Well, if you looked at just the situation we have now, it's pretty bleak. So you need to put in some assumptions for innovation, and I think we're going to be able to build AI and not need quite as much energy as they're telling us today. Again, I have no inside source of information there. Certainly in terms of all of the above, the White House really has tried to distance themselves and really push back on any recognition of climate change as a real force. And I got a master's in Earth and Environmental Science back in 1979. Back then, we didn't call it climate change, we called it the greenhouse effect. But we predicted many of the circumstances and consequences that we see around us today, not just the extreme weather, the droughts, the warming of ocean temperatures, but across the board, most of those predictions, not all, but most of those predictions have come true. I think there are a number of Republican senators that recognize that climate change is real. They think it's not such a big deal. They don't feel the same sense of urgency. And I think the scientific community, and as I guess the one scientist in the Senate, I hold myself to account that we've got to do a better job of explaining them why there needs to be a sense of urgency around climate change. Because I think we do need all of the above. When Secretary Wright talks about affordable energy so that we can make sure that we have natural gas that can be liquefied and shipped over to Africa, where 2 million people a year die from pulmonary issues directly as a result of burning open hearth fires to cook their food and heat their homes. That's something everybody should care about. But at the same time, climate change is real, and at the same time we're doing that, we've also got to be willing to push every source of energy we can that is cleaner. And by that I mean distributed solar, again, a place where we're going to lose hundreds of thousands of jobs if the Senate comes through with a draconian version of their bill and really slashes it down to the bone. Not just that solar, but down the list. Geothermal. Geothermal needs more research. They need investments to go to scale. There are a couple of significant companies now. Fervo is one that was in town yesterday that have immense progress. But right now, some significant investments in making sure that they can do the R&D and accelerate the R&D and do a couple projects at scale so they can demonstrate how that's going to dramatically reduce the prices. Things like geothermal, where they are using the technology developed by directional drilling from oil and gas and all the fracturing of rocks deep in the ground. It's very similar to what was developed by the oil and gas industry, and many of the same companies are involved. But more importantly, they're adapting that in real time to get better productivity from the same investment, they're all of a sudden they're beginning to say, oh no, we can get much more energy out of this than we thought. And that's the part that's exciting, is that even as we're facing a pretty stark landscape of, we've got all these energy needs, and you add up all the different aggregate sources of energy, we're still a little short. And on top of that, whichever the House or the Senate budget, however this ends up, looks almost certain to abandon many billions of dollars that are invested in wind, solar, batteries, what have you. All of that, hopefully we'll be able to balance all of that out with these innovations like what we're seeing in geothermal.
It's very interesting, Aaron. We heard from the CEO of Devon and the general counsel from Williams, and oil and gas across line. It's not a matter of climate change. It's actually just, we need the energy. We need all of the energy. There's no reason to discriminate, which is, frankly, a new frame. But the big problem we've had in this country, whether it's renewables or gas pipelines or transmission, is everybody wants to go big, and it's really hard to go fast. And it's a permitting issue, and it's a permitting issue at the federal level. It's a permitting issue at the state level as well. There were all these permitting conversations, in the last Congress. Where do you think we're going fast? Technology is one answer, but how do we get out of our own way on permitting?
Well, permitting has been, again, another of these dividing issues where there should be an alignment of self-interest, that we've got to go faster. And things like, we haven't had a new mining law, a real mining law in this country for over 100 years, which is pathetic, because that means that we don't have a framework that the rest of the world can use. Usually we take the environmental progress we make in this country and the rest of the world follows us. Maybe not exactly, and they might dilute it a little bit. But we need to address things like mining, regional transmission lines. These things are taking 10 or 15 years to permit and go through the process. There's litigation. And historically, many of the many of the environmental organizations have blocked the speed at which this infrastructure can be developed. Well, if you want to address climate change, we don't have that luxury to litigate and slow down these types of investments. Critical minerals, I mean, if we're going to address climate change, forget about aerospace and our global communications, but just to focus on climate change, we need all kinds of metals, copper, nickel, some of the common metals, but also rare earth and a bunch of the more rare minerals and critical minerals. If we're going to be able to address climate change successfully, we need to develop mines faster. And we've got to make sure that we provide a level of environmental certainty, allow a full-scale picture of what happens before a mine is actually opened up. So in the planning process, make sure that you have indigenous peoples at the table, knowing what kinds of jobs are going to be there, if there's going to be a water project that creates enough water for that mine, is it also going to help villages in the area or local communities in the area? How do we operate a mine at the very highest level of environmental safety to make sure that we don't have pollution at scale or degradations? And then what's the remediation after the mine lives its productive life? How do we restore that landscape to something that the local community is going to be satisfied with? That should all be laid out so that communities know what they're in for if they're going to have a mine there, and it's not an awful thing. They're going to get jobs, they're going to get investments. For many communities, they'll want to embrace this. That alignment of self-interest is just waiting to happen. And we've done a couple of dinners. My wife and I have a row house about 2 blocks from the Capitol. We walk out in the morning, I look up, and there's the Capitol there. It's very sobering when things aren't going well. You see a couple hundred years that might go down the tubes if you don't help get our act together. And we've had CEOs from some of the largest mining companies in the world and CEOs from some of the largest environmental nonprofits at the dinner table, right? 8 or 10 people trying to figure out what is that alignment of self-interest where we actually all kind of have the same goals. How can we make sure we protect the environment, give predictability and a sense of security around having something scary like a mine in a community, but at the same time go a lot faster. Right? It's got to be transparent. It's got to provide the protections that communities need, but it's got to go faster. And I think that's going to be one of the challenges, not just in terms of mining, and transmission, but all kinds of investments we're going to need to get the energy we need and to make sure that we address climate change the way we need to.
Well, that's encouraging that you feel like the stakeholders are moving. Let me just ask you directly on the bill itself. What was the Manchin-Barrasso bill from the previous Congress? Do you think we have a chance in an all-of-the-above permitting reform bill in this Congress?
So it'll be. I think we do. The answer is yes. There's a lot of work to be done. At the beginning of this year, I sat down with Mike Lee, the senator from Utah, who is the chairman of the Energy and Natural Resources Committee. I'm on that committee. And Martin Heinrich is the ranking member, the senior Democrat. And I think there's a consensus that we can get back. I thought that was a pretty darn good bill. And I spent a lot of time working on that bill. I'm not quite clear on why it didn't go forward, because we had Democratic votes. I think what will happen probably is that the bill will come back in a more, a more development side, skewed a little bit more to the Republican side, and we'll have to negotiate that because, again, this will be a bill that needs 60 votes. So those Democratic votes will have to be negotiated, and I think that we'll get a balanced bill. When I talked to Senator Lee about this, he was optimistic, and he's a pretty savvy, clear-eyed. We disagree on plenty of issues. He wants to sell a lot of public lands. I'm from the over my dead body. I realize you can't say that now. In a much more sobering way. It's just that you use these cliches that are no longer.
Not on my watch.
Yeah, really. Not on my watch to do. Anyway, I think he and I can find that alignment to make real progress there. We'll see.
That's encouraging. Well, you're a geologist, so I have to ask you about critical minerals. And as you know, we don't call them rare earths anymore because they're not really rare. They're just important, and it's really hard to get them out of the ground. So you've talked about the need for mining reform, which counts. But where in your view are we going to get these minerals from? And do you think we have a chance in the United States, where we have some significant reserves of these minerals, to extract them here, or should we keep focusing on finding these in other countries?
I think this is another place where it's a little bit all of the above, and I want to emphasize it's not just the extraction of critical minerals, but it's the refining, and in many cases, the refining, even more than the sourcing of these critical minerals, is being controlled by China, and certainly our greatest rival is China, I would argue. And they now, in many cases, dominate the refining of critical minerals, in addition to the extraction. We are not going to be able, in this country, we definitely, in this country, need to be able to demonstrate a certain capacity to deliver and refine critical minerals, but we cannot do it by ourselves. And that's why it's so important that everybody who's here, and why the Atlantic Council, I think, is more important now than probably ever since its inception, because we need our network of allies. And whether we're talking about Europe and NATO, whether we're talking about Australia and Japan, we have an alignment of countries that share certain values and have historically worked very well together despite differences. Not that there haven't always been differences between the United States and our allies, but right now there is, at least I feel, there should be a real emphasis put on, all right, let's look on the positive parts. How can we continue to work together and make sure that the fractures that we see are not endemic? They don't lead to more fractures and deeper fractures and more problems. And I think, again, having organizations like the Atlantic Council allow us to build that muscle. And in many ways, it's a little bit like our mining. My wife often talks about how love is a muscle, and you've got to stick with it and keep it. Don't want to ever let it atrophy even a little. Our international relationships are like that, and I think not paying attention and working on toning that muscle, keeping that muscle vigorous, we do that at our own risk.
Well, we appreciate that. We're feeling the love here at the Atlantic Council, and certainly here, this is our 10th anniversary of the Global Energy Center, and in this room we have representatives both from governments and from companies from Europe, from Asia, from the Middle East, from Latin America. That's why we're the Global Energy Forum, and you hear from the corporations this consensus about the importance of North American integration, the importance of relationships with allies. If you could expand on that a little bit more for your colleagues in the Senate, particularly, the Republican Party had long been an internationalist party, and it's somewhat divided now. But do you see that sense of internationalism, that commitment to the transatlantic relationship from your colleagues across the aisle? And do you think we'll see an evolution in their communication to the administration that might moderate some of these frictions we're seeing now?
That's a complicated question, but yes, I do. And I think there are a number of Republican senators that historically have been vocal around the importance of these alliances. And I think they're still holding those beliefs. I don't think they've wandered away from the importance and the necessity of international alliances. They're having a hard time figuring out how to get to a compromise, because obviously there are people in the White House, and it's not always President Trump, but there are people in the White House that are real, true isolationists in the deepest sense, and many of these Republican senators just don't agree with that. And so they're looking, my opinion, I don't want to put any words in anybody's mouth, but they're trying to find what is that pathway by which we can build sufficient relationships that we can depend on each other, we can rebuild some of the trust that's there. I mean, that's, to my way of thinking, one of the greatest risks we face right now is how do we get the trust back? I mean, so many of these situations that we're in, cutting back on the investment in scientific research at almost every level, that corrodes the trust that many in the scientific community have in how America has always led the way in research and development and breaking new innovations and creating whole new ideas. That trust is essential. So whether it's the alliance that helps us face real adversity together and help each other solve it, or whether it's the trust that scientific research is ultimately going to benefit everyone, we can't overlook the importance of that feeling that we can count on each other.
Really helpful. Let me end on workforce development, because one of the things we heard from the hyperscalers and everyone else is we need the workforce of the future too, and we are behind on that. You serve on the Education Committee as well as Energy and Natural Resources, and you've got Colorado School of Mines and Boulder and others in your state. But what can we do? What can the Congress do about accelerating the development of the workforce that we need to meet all this energy demand and to meet all this infrastructure bill that's coming our way?
Oh, and we should start with that question because we could spend an hour. I mean, Colorado School of Mines, I would argue the best mining school perhaps in the world. We're producing 600 mining engineers. If you add them all together, every major you could find at every relevant school, and China's 100 times that. In other words, they are creating the workforce that's going to help them take the lead in critical minerals and finding, extracting, and processing critical minerals. Each are fields themselves. They're going to be way ahead of us. But it's even deeper than that. What you're describing is really what we need is more of our young people to get involved in technology and science. And we've got to find more entry points. There are places in the Inflation Reduction Act where we actually were making investments to try and get more people from all different segments of our population. So rural kids to start taking and get excited about science. And what is that? What gets them excited? Is it space? Is it discovery, or is it agriculture? Where do we get them to begin to pay attention to the need for technology and science, and so that they can be prepared when they get to high school to make decisions and choose fields where there'll be jobs? Because otherwise we're going to have a workforce that is woefully unprepared. And when you add in AI and what that's going to do to so many of the jobs that we just take for granted now, it becomes truly terrifying. That if we don't make massive investments and begin to rearrange how we structure those investments, we'll dig ourselves into a hole that we won't be able to get out of.
Great. Well, we appreciate your commitment to all those issues. We've come to the end of our time. You've been very generous with yours, and you've got to go back and help deliver a budget that will save the energy industry. So we don't want to hold you back from that. If we can please say our thanks to the Senator.
Thank you, David.